Welcome to World Changers, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories of those who are making a difference one step at a time. From entrepreneurs to activists, scientists to spiritual leaders, we explore the journeys of individuals who are shaping our world for the better. Join us as we uncover the inspiration, challenges, and triumphs behind their remarkable contributions. Get ready to be inspired, motivated, and empowered to change the world. This is World Changers. Thank you for tuning in to watch World Changers. Today I have Dr. Bryan Henss. He has successfully owned and operated one of the biggest health and wellness chiropractor centers in Dallas-Fort Worth for 10 years now. He graduated from Illinois College in 2009 and Logan University in 2013. Dr. Bryan then went on to receive additional training and certifications in spinal correction, detoxification, nutrition, and exercise before opening his own clinic in 2014. Dr. Bryan has helped thousands of local residents get their health back on track with testimonies ranging from relief of severe back pain, migraines, infertility issues, weight loss, ear infections, autoimmune diseases, and so much more. He's made no claim to curing any of these, though. He simply helps the patient's body to restore natural health and healing the way that God intended. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So I have been going to your clinic now for a year and a half, and I just think you're one of the smartest men I've ever met when it comes to health, and I'm serious. Not just chiropractic. I've gone to chiropractic for a long time, but you're just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to overall health. And what inspires me to get to know you more and to bring you on the show is the fact that you're not the kind of chiropractor that's like, always get adjusted, you just get all your bones, which is important, but you're focusing on the nervous system and your gut health and everything that makes health. And there's a lot of factors in on that. And so that's kind of what I want to touch base on today and let all the viewers know that.
Yeah, well, thank you for your kind words, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Health is, I say all the time, health isn't complicated. It's actually very simple to be well. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's not complicated. Mm-hmm. And so you're well aware, in our office, we kind of have these, what we call the five essentials, these categories of things. And really everything that could possibly affect our health kind of fits into one of those categories in one way or another. And if we just learn to tackle each of those areas step by step effectively, it's the body is designed to be well, healthy, normal function, vitality, vibrance, energy, feeling good. These are all the norm. The problem is that we've see so much sickness and so much suffering and so much disease and pain that's become normal in people's perspective. And so it's really kind of re-educating too of that idea that just because you have 5 friends that have similar problems to you doesn't mean that's normal, right? It's common, but it's not normal. And common and normal are not synonymous. Yeah. So, yeah.
And I love that. And that's something I've learned. Originally coming into your office, I came, like everyone goes to the chiropractor for. Yeah. Like, my head hurts, my neck is tight, whatever. But then after I started seeing you more and I started seeing improvement with my life, I got plugged into, you have health and wellness coaches in the office too. Yeah. Like your wife and Kayla, and learning more about the gut and then getting my gut on track and cutting out certain foods and learning about toxins. Oh my gosh. That's a whole episode on itself. Yeah. Foods and toxins. Totally. There's a lot of factors that go into truly being healthy. Yeah. And I think, and that's one thing I want to talk about now, is overall health of America is just getting worse. and worse. And so many people just want a cure-all pill or a shot to lose weight, but it's more than just losing weight. Like, you can lose weight and be skinny, but are you actually healthy? Is your body functioning the way it should be?
Right.
I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah, there's plenty of skinny people who aren't well.
Yeah.
Right. Look at somebody
Skinny
who's
fat. I learned
chronically...
that's what skinny fat means.
Yeah. Look at somebody who's chronically ill.
Yeah.
Right. Like really, really sick, has like a terrible digestive issue. And sometimes we think about being unhealthy, and generally, because we see it again most commonly, see somebody overweight, right? And that's not the only determining factor, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But in our mind, you think of somebody who's unwell, and a lot of times that's what comes to mind. But there's plenty of incredibly sick people who are undernourished or malnourished. They're withering away, so to speak. And so, yeah, there's a handful of things there, and you kind of started unpacking it a little bit already. So when you look at like the health of America, like how do we get to this state where we have just chronic disease like crazy? I mean, 5 out of 6 Americans end up with heart disease or cancer in their lifetime. Autoimmune conditions are running rampant. We've got the sickest kids in the history of the world ever right now in this country, and that's undeniable. We've got more chronic disease than ever, and it's happening in younger and younger kids. For example, type 2 diabetes, right? Why do they call it type 2? When I was younger, the first time I heard about diabetes, you heard about, well, there's type 1 and then there's adult onset. They've eliminated, nobody calls it adult onset anymore because type 2 diabetes is happening in children.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it used to happen in adults only? Why was it adult onset? Because it took, a lifetime, so to speak, or a half of a lifetime of the lifestyle we were living that got someone to that point where they were that sick. And now, because we live such a chronically poor lifestyle, and we have for generations now, several generations in a row, we're seeing that happen to these kids. So at 10, 12 years old, they're type 2 diabetic. And nobody's stopping to ask, or not enough people are stopping to ask, like, wait a second, why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of the segue or the answer to that kind of idea of how did we get so sick? How do we end up here, right? Well, it really, if we really simplify it, it comes down to a lack of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's my biggest thing.
Everything's lack of knowledge.
It's a lack of knowledge, yep. Right? So the average American has very poor understanding of what it even means to be well. I tell people all the time, I said, if you're trying to be well, like we all want to be healthy, right? Nobody wants to be sick or hurting, but you can't even define what that means very well, then the chances of you hitting the target are basically zero. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's like, what does it even mean to be healthy? And I ask that question to patients all the time. I ask it to people in the community, and the answer I normally get is, well, if I feel good, right? I feel good. I don't have aches and pains. I'm not quote unquote sick. I exercise. I eat right, which is important and is part of what we teach our patients. But in and of itself, it's not enough.
You don't ever feel when something big happens. Like you don't feel the heart attack coming, or you don't feel yourself gaining diabetes.
Right. Exactly, right. And so you look at you look at 3 of the most prevalent chronic diseases that we deal with: heart disease, cancer, diabetes. What does it feel like?
Nothing.
Nothing. What does it feel like in the early stages, especially? Absolutely nothing. But we know it takes years for these things to develop. So for someone to find a tumor, they've had serious cancer growth for nearly 10 years in most cases.
Even a small tumor.
Yeah. By the time we detect it medically, in most cases, and that was Harvard research that was published several years ago, we look at heart disease. 60% of people who have a heart attack have no prior symptoms. They didn't, at least weren't diagnosed high blood pressure, high cholesterol, feeling bad, any of these sorts of things. They're just trucking along through life. They feel fine. Oftentimes even, you hear stories of quite commonly, somebody goes in for their annual physical and they're like, they're as healthy as a horse. Bam. Heart attack, weeks or months later. Yep. Cancer diagnosis, they go in for a physical. Everything looks great. A year later, you have stage 3, stage 4 cancer. You have maybe weeks or months to live. Right. And it doesn't develop that fast. People think, I got hit with the heart attack. I got struck by cancer. It's like, no.
Stage 4 happened last night.
This has been happening for years, and you've been sick internally. We always say you've been sick inside for years, and then the disease shows up, right? The sickness has been developing, and then it gets to the tipping point where you can be diagnosed, where we can actually see it, touch it, feel it, measure it. right? But it takes a long time to get to that point. And so that lack of knowledge, people don't know what it means to be well, and then therefore they don't know how to get there. And if you take that a step further, really our education system has a lot to do with that. Not just, our standard like public schools, which is part of it, right? Because we're taught from a young age, right? Again, talking about people not understanding what it even means to be well. We're taught from a young age, again, if I feel good, I'm fine. So therefore, if I feel bad, every symptom is a bad thing. And the symptom needs to be squashed, and the symptom is what needs to be addressed.
But the symptom's not always bad.
Correct.
Yeah.
Someone's been paying attention at the office. Right. So, and some people, I think a lot of people innately understand that, but it's been so ingrained in them that there's this friction. It's kind of the conversation we had before, like there's this internal friction. And so I can ask patients or people I just meet in general, people in the community go, hey, so let's think about this. Is every symptom good or bad? Or is every symptom a bad thing and needs to be dealt with? So for example, fever. Fever is a perfect example. Now, when I ask people, is a fever good or bad? What's really interesting is you watch this internal struggle for a moment, because people are smart. Yeah, exactly. People think this is a trick question, right? And sometimes they even say, like, is this a trick question? I'm like, no, it's not a trick question. Just what's your honest thought on, is a fever good or bad? And they'll sit there sometimes and they'll think for a second. And then they're like, well, I think a fever's good, isn't it?
Question mark.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, yes, it is good, right? And they're like, yeah, it's just your body doing like responding.
It should be good, but they don't know why.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, we have the conversation. Well, what is the fever? The fever is your body's innate response to the foreign invader, the bacteria, the virus, the whatever, right? We heat up the internal temperature. The foreign invader doesn't live as well. They thrive at 98.6 or, give or take. And if we can get that core temperature up to, 100, 101, 102, then that makes that foreign invader weak and more susceptible to the immune system and white blood cells doing all their things, right? So you have that conversation and patients like, yeah. And they go, so why do you give your kid Tylenol every time they get a fever?
To mask it.
And then their eyes get kind of big and like, well, and then they start backtracking and they start going, well, if the fever gets too high, and I'm like, first of all, that's a whole nother conversation, because it's incredibly rare that your body would spike a fever so high that it could cause all these other problems. It's much more likely.
And what is that, 104?
I've never even seen it personally. I've only ever experienced directly or indirectly with someone like a febrile seizure a couple of times. And in most cases, those things are short-lived. And it's not to make light of that at all. And we want to make sure that a kid who experiences something like that is properly taken care of. And we want to check all of the boxes. But we live in this fear that, what if they have a febrile seizure? Well, febrile seizures don't cause like life-impairing damage, like ever. So what are we so afraid of? But again, we've been taught all the symptoms are bad. So the fever's bad. The fever could lead to the seizure. The seizure's bad. This cascade of fear. And again, it comes back to a lack of knowledge. When you understand that the chances of something like a febrile seizure or a long-term negative effect from a fever of any kind is incredibly, incredibly rare, yet the number one cause of acute liver failure is the usage of Tylenol in this country, which is way more common than any negative effect of a fever. So we're giving these drugs, which we know have potential, very serious potential. When I say potential, probable if over long-term use. We think it's minimal because millions of doses of Tylenol probably get administered in this country every day, right? I don't have that statistic. I just know it's probably a lot, right? Yeah. And so we think, well, and we don't hear about people having liver problems from it. But it does happen, and happens way more than any negative consequence of a fever. And what's the long-term effect of Tylenol for several days, Motrin for several days, et cetera, and you do that multiple times over a lifetime and so on and so forth. And then when you're 30 or 40, you have a liver problem. You have some sort of other issue. And we never think about, again, that is a lifetime chronic disease that developed. And so we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're trading off these mild symptoms that, will have no long-term consequence whatsoever. In fact, will actually strengthen our immune system. We're trading that for a chronic disease later in life, all in the name of feeling good, not hurting.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing's true for all kinds of other. You can go through a whole slew of symptoms, right? Like vomiting, diarrhea, etc. It's like your body's responding. It's getting a foreign invader, something out, right? It's purging itself of something that it shouldn't be there.
Well, for some reason, as you were talking about fever, it made me think on like a sauna.
Yeah.
Like, why do we as adults, like we go work out, we sit in the sauna? Why do people go to a sauna?
There's a lot of reasons. It's well, number one, it's like to sweat, right?
Yeah.
And then what are we hoping to get from that? We want to get out toxins. Different like infrared saunas, etc., can decrease, chronic inflammation and therefore reduce pain and all these great benefits that come from that. You can even use, not just sweating out the toxins, but again, the whole idea of the fever, if we heat up the core temperature, anything that's not built, like our bodies are built to withstand that. It's like if you go exercise really hard, like we're here in Texas, right? It's 100 friggin' degrees outside all the time. You can go outside and work out and your core temperature is going to come way up and you're going to sweat your tail off the whole time you're out there. And your body's perfectly built to adapt to that. Now, yes, we have to hydrate and be smart, but at the end of the day, you're built to be able to adapt to that. What doesn't adapt well to those high temperatures? Bacteria, viruses, cancer cells. The reason I got introduced to the whole idea of the sauna was a mentor of mine going through a cancer experience years ago. And that was where I learned about infrared sauna and heating up that core temperature. It's not that the temperature itself will kill the cancer cells like a fever can do to but it weakens them to the extent that the immune system can now overwhelm them, that they slow down their growth and development. Like they quit multiplying as easily because they're weakened, because they're damaged, because it's waning on them. And now you've got a better opportunity to clear that stuff out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah. So, go back to the other part of the conversation, like the whole education system. So we're taught from a young age, right? And this is where I could rub somebody the wrong way with what I'm about to walk into. And
that's okay.
And
we're talking truth here.
At the end of the day, it is what it is, right? So oftentimes, like I'll have patients come to me and say, I'm dealing with this or that. And they'll say, hey, I've been to 2 or 3 other doctors. I've been to 10 other doctors. I've got a whole team of doctors for all the different diagnoses. Again, because we have specialists for everything, right? And they'll say, I asked one of my doctors, what caused this? And oftentimes, depending on the situation, they'll say, the doctor looked at me like I was crazy. What do you mean what caused it? Well, we don't know what caused it. Well, there has to be a cause. Nothing just happens. There's no effect without a cause, right? You're not just bad luck. It's not just bad germs. It's not just bad genes. There has to be some other factors at play. And again, the real good science supports all of that, right? And so where am I going with this? Well, when I say lack of knowledge, unfortunately, and I'm not picking on anyone, there are some brilliant people in the medical world for sure, right? But they only know what they've been taught.
Yep.
And so when you have a limited education, which we all have, nobody has every piece of information and every answer for everything. I don't, not even close. I know that. So when a doctor says, well, we don't know, or we don't have an answer, we don't know where it came from, we don't know what else to do, it's like, it doesn't mean that there's not an answer. It just means that one individual's knowledge has run out. And that doesn't make them bad or ignorant or anything like that. It just means that you've met their limitation. And so now we need to find someone else. So the medical industry as a whole, and the reason I can say this confidently is not because I'm upset or again, trying to tear down another profession or anything like that. I've taken care of medical doctors. I've taken care of tons of nurses, of dentists. And they come in, and when we walk through, like you said, these different things that we talk about and that we teach in our workshops and just our normal education that we try to give to all of our patients in all the different areas, they'll say things like, I never learned this. I wasn't taught this in medical school. I wasn't taught this in nursing school. Where did you get this information? Because it makes perfect sense. It's logical. Of course, here, you can go look it up here or there or whatever. Here's a book. Here's the research. And so, like I've experienced firsthand that these people that we trust, Because you as a layperson say, well, I'm going to go to the doctor because I have the symptom or the whatever.
Yes, as we've been taught to do.
Yeah. Right? So these people that we've been taught to go to can only share with us what limited knowledge they've been given. And if that knowledge has been tainted, which is a whole nother topic of how our system has come to be, we do a whole show on that.
Yep.
Then we're gonna get a limited, tainted answer, so to speak. And so now we find ourselves just minimizing symptoms.
Well, and what's interesting with that too is you can go to 3 different doctors for the same exact thing, and all 3 doctors may tell you 3 different things.
Yep.
They're going to treat it 3 different ways or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to be different. And not everything, but there's some things that I think with the medical field and a lot of things, it's black or it's white.
Mm-hmm.
And in the medical field especially, it's not. There's a lot of gray.
It's my way or the highway kind of thing. Right?
Yes,
It's like
and if it's
this is
not
the only answer.
Yeah, and if it's
Yeah.
not, like, if I didn't learn it in the book, or like this logically doesn't make sense. Well, everybody's different.
Yeah.
God created us all different.
Yeah.
And we all live different lifestyles. And there's a lot of things that if you really think about it and unpack, there's not going to be, for example, when I came to start seeing you, I was having a lot of problems with my hips and my knee and all these things with walking.
Yep.
And if I would have gone in, like I did go see a spine surgeon, and I heard him out first, and then I came in and I heard you out. And if I were to ask him, like, what was one specific thing that caused this? Well, he may say, oh, like when the horse fell back on you when you were 15, or the car wreck you're in. Yes, that may have been what started it.
For sure.
But that would have been back when I was 18 and 15. I'm now 30. And like my left knee, I put all my weight on my right leg, or on my left leg, because my right leg's now my shorter leg because my hips. So now I'm having knee problems. So in actuality, that's accumulated for a decade.
Right.
It's not just one thing that causes it. And so doctors don't know this. They can't go have a counseling session and have an insight on your life to be like,
Right.
okay, how have you sat? How do you sit? Or how
Right.
do you drive for the last 20 years? Or how do you, whatever, like it
Yeah.
accumulates.
Totally. You said something there. Like there's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody's
Absolutely.
different and so on. And there could be more than one way to tackle a problem. And that's really a big thing for people to understand when it comes to, that self-education, if you will, that again, fixing the lack of knowledge. I have a colleague, I can't take credit for the story, but I was just chatting with him recently, and he was sharing a story of the group of us. The long story short is that a patient of his had a grandbaby who was in the hospital having some issues, and she needed a surgery. It wasn't necessary. There wasn't some natural solution for this issue. It was a serious condition that needed to be addressed medically. Praise God that we have that, right?
Yeah.
But she was having this breathing issue. This was like I think it was an infant. It wasn't a newborn, but it was, the baby's very young, a couple of months. And so my friend's patient comes in, and he could just tell something was wrong. And he asked her, he said, her name happened to be Lisa, which is my wife's name. He said, Miss Lisa, what's going on? You seem really off today. Is everything okay? I could just sense something's wrong with you. And she starts telling this story. My grandbaby's in the hospital. She needs this procedure, but she's having this breathing issue. And if they can't get the breathing issue under control, she can't have the procedure. If she doesn't have the procedure, she could not make it. It is a high possibility. And so we tried this medication and this other medication, and they're like, they don't know what else to do. And so they're, trying to figure out what the solution is. And so my colleague said, give me your daughter's name, give me the phone number, call them, tell them I'm calling. I'm going to call them and talk to them. And so the long story short is he went and he did what we do, and he evaluated this baby's spine and nerve system, and he gave this baby like a light adjustment, which baby adjustments are, this like tiny little thing. It's just so easy to adjust these healthy spines from babies. And sure enough, he goes, look, that's it. Keep me posted. Well, the next morning he gets a text from Miss Lisa, his patient. Oh my God, her oxygen levels are coming up. She's breathing better.
Wow.
They're changing over her protocol. Next day, same thing. Update protocol, reducing the protocol to like less and less aggressive oxygen therapy and so on and so forth. And it was all because he simply identified that there was an interference in her body's innate ability to heal and function properly. He cleared that. the baby started breathing better. There was pressure on our brainstem due to a misalignment in the top part of her spine. And his point was, he was the one that he said to me recently, he goes, this idea that there's only one way to do it, that their way is the only way. So it's like, we either give these drugs to help her breathe better, or there's no other solution. If that doesn't work, she might not ever start breathing again, which means we can't have the surgery, which means your baby, your grandbaby may die. And how do we get to a place in society where that's the accepted answer?
Yeah.
Right. Again, so thank God that, that my friend had the wherewithal to go, something's wrong with my patient. I'm going to ask, kind of a Holy Spirit moment of just like, he said, as soon as he looked across the office, he saw her like, she doesn't look right today.
Yeah.
And he just walked over and started asking her what was going on between other patients. And so again, there is more than one way. You can choose how you manage your health. You get to decide. Are you going to treat every symptom that pops up just so you can hopefully feel a little better in the here and now? Or are you going to work with your body to allow it to function and heal at its best? So again, you go back to the fever analogy, like what can I do in support of my body's immune system? Because that's what's going to work right now. Right? If someone's got diarrhea, if someone's throwing, like, again, there's some sort of detox or innate immune response happening. So what can I do to support that? A cough, for instance. I'm coughing. People don't like to cough. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. Maybe it interrupts your sleep. So they take a cough suppressant. Well, the cough is your body's, again, innate response to whatever it's trying to deal with. You suppress that, you slow down the healing process. So what can I do to support that instead? Exactly. You get to decide, but there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
Right? And one of them is going to lead to better long-term health,
yep,
undoubtedly. And the other one's going to hopefully make you feel better now, but what are the consequences later?
Exactly. And it may just keep developing into something else.
Right.
I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
So let's unpack a little. Actually, before we unpack that, maybe a couple minutes ago, you talked about genetics. Let's talk about genetics for a second, because a lot of people think, oh, my mom had it, my grandma has it, so I'm going to get it. It's genetically.
Yeah.
And I think I read, I don't remember the percentage, you may know, the percentage of any kind of disease that gets passed along. Yeah. Like a lot of things genetically.
Straight from your genetics.
You can cut it and you can change it all with your habits.
Yeah.
So let's kind of touch base on that for a second.
It's a great topic because so many people come in and they have that exact, again, lack of knowledge. They have this belief that they've been then
and they just accept, oh, they've all had diabetes, so I have it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've got this, family lineage, or I've got, people that I'm related to in whatever capacity that have XYZ problem. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's very likely that I'm going to get it. And there's a couple of things to unpack there. Number one, very simply, the one thing that we share just as much or more with our family than our genetics is our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Right? So if mom fed you garbage growing up, because for whatever reason, she didn't know any better, couldn't afford better food, whatever it is. If you ate that
system in general.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So if you ate junk and your family didn't exercise, let's just use that as a simple example. Chances are, as you get older, you're going to eat junk and not exercise because that's what you've known. Because up until, for most kids, 18-ish, you live at home. Mom decides what groceries come in the house, or dad, whatever. They decide what groceries come into the house. They decide what's cooked for dinner. And so you either eat good or bad because that's how you were raised. You do that for 18, 20 years, you now have a taste for those things. You have cravings. You have favorites, etc. And it's hard to break. You have addictions, and it's hard to break those habits and those addictions, right? If your family wasn't involved in athletics and exercise and being outdoors and active lifestyle, it's hard to create that. If you sat in front of the TV all the time, you played video games most of the time, right? You weren't active. It's hard to suddenly go, you know what, I'm going to get active. Mm-hmm. Now it's a choice and you can make that choice, and a lot of people will. But that's step one, right? Is acknowledging that you share this poor lifestyle oftentimes just as much or more than your genetic makeup. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, if we dive into that further, you say, hey, there's a statistic out there that's so much, depending on what research, there's a couple of different research studies that have looked at, that have come out on this, and several of them several years ago. This isn't new information to a lot of us. There's a famous doctor who literally has built his career on preaching and teaching the concept of epigenetics, right? And the prefix epi meaning above. So above genetics, what's more impactful than our genetics? So the different research studies say roughly 90 to 95% of our health outcomes are determined by our lifestyle. And only 5 to 10% is directly tied to our genetics. And even then, if you really dive into the epigenetic science, what we know is that our lifestyle can actually change our genetic code, which can be really, it should be exciting and empowering for a lot of people, because not only do we know that 90 to 95% is just purely based on what you do or don't do for yourself. Do you eat right? Do you exercise? Do you get plenty of sleep? Do you drink enough water? Are you hydrated? Do you do you rest? Do you get adjusted? Do you take care of your nervous system? Do you see your dentist regularly? You know, do you avoid toxicity and you not smoke and drink too much? All these factors, right, that come into play. So there's that, but then that little piece that says, hey, if you actually do the right things consistently really well, you can actually change your genetic code a little bit. Perfect example of that is we look at cancer, for instance. So there's a specific gene in the gene code. They call it the P51 or P53 gene, I believe. And that's the when they mapped out the genetic code or whatever in like the 90s. So they labeled all these different parts of the human genome. And they said, this right here, if you flip it off or on, it's a genetic marker that says that every cell in your body has a life cycle, right? Like the cells that you are consisted of today, none of them existed when you were born.
Yeah, no.
You've completely rebuilt your entire body through this natural process of cells growing, dividing, dying, and being replaced with healthy new cells, right? And this is happening in all of us every single day. The P53 gene is the gene that decides when that cell should die.
It's like the brain of cells.
It's a process called apoptosis, meaning the cell should die at a certain time, and if your body's healing properly and functioning properly, then it will have already been essentially replaced by a healthy new version of itself. If that gene marker gets flipped the other way by lifestyle choices, there's certain things we know will affect that genetic marker. Then the cell will not die when it's supposed to. And you can ask Joe Schmo, hey, a cell that keeps growing and dividing uncontrollably, because that's what it would be, right? If it's supposed to just live its life cycle and die and it doesn't, then that's uncontrolled cell growth and replication. What do you call that? What do you call that? Cells that grow and divide and don't die. Cancer.
Okay.
So uncontrolled cellular growth and division. Cancer.
Huh. All based on
that
lifestyle
one. And your genetic code is subject to your lifestyle choices. And that's one example. And so there's a whole body of research, this epigenetic science that talks all about this. They look into this and they evaluate it and they test it. What happens when someone eats this or doesn't eat this, or they're deficient in this thing or that thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we know. So you take into the fact that we've got great research from the two different research studies. I believe one was Columbia School of Medicine, one came from Harvard, about the 90 or 95% of our health outcomes are determined by lifestyle choices. So you've got that, and then you've got the fact that those lifestyle choices will then also offset potentially that other 5 to 10% of our genetic code. And holy cow, we've got. I mean, you got the golden ticket, right?
You can literally rebuild yourself.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Now, if you want to go down a whole nother path, again, this could be a whole nother conversation of, here's the scary part of that. If your lifestyle has potential effects on your genetic code, and you live a poor lifestyle, and then two people get together with a poor lifestyle and conceive a baby, you're going to pass on. So they're starting
starting their life.
Starting at a disadvantage
Negative.
Because of the genetic code that you pass on.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason I'm a firm believer that, and based on the data and the science that we've just discussed here in this short time, I'm a firm believer that is a big part of why we got such chronically ill children, because we're living in a society now where we've got at least a couple of generations in a row, really probably go back to like the 50s. Like the 50s, for instance, is when they really started pushing like the low-fat diet, which is just terrible, right? It's absolute garbage. Seed oils and that whole thing, and this isn't a nutrition class, but all that stuff just permeating society for well over a half a century now, 3/4 of a century. And so we've got multiple generations that have lived that way, and this is one tiny piece, right? You do that for multiple generations, and the kids that are born today are at a significant genetic disadvantage, I believe, compared to, a few generations back. Now, the beautiful thing about that is again, you can still reverse it. It can still be corrected. But if it's not corrected quickly, you end up with really sick kids. And that for me is, one of the scariest things when you think about it.
Absolutely. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole and discussion, I think.
Yeah.
But that would be the definition of a generational curse.
Oh, yeah.
Is this has happened for so many generations. It's not necessarily some people think, oh, like mom and dad legit cursed me. No.
Yeah.
It's the fact that grandma and grandpa, and then mom and dad, and then us, and if we've all done the same thing over and over and over again, I mean, it's the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
Then we're stuck in it too. And it takes someone to be like, enough is enough. This is what I'm going to change. And I'm going to make for the future generations healthier or better or etc. Whatever it is you want to change that. So,
and I tell people that periodically. I go, when you come in and you're trying to make these changes, and patients will, you've been a patient for a while. We get to know our patients. We get to know their history. We get to know their kids. You take care of a family for 10 years, like I have for several of my families. And multiple generations, and you're watching kids grow up in these sorts of things. And I've told people many times, I'm like, you don't realize how powerful what you're doing is. You think you're just like fixing, some health problems that you have. But if you're really engaging in that and you're making that your new lifestyle, this is just your norm, and you're sharing that with your kids, with your grandkids, et cetera, you are radically changing the trajectory of their health for potentially for generations. Because just like 3 or 4 generations ago, all of a sudden it was better to eat margarine than real butter for some crazy reason, right? Because some bad science and some bad media coverage.
Everybody jumped on the fat.
Everybody jumped on the bandwagon. Right? Fat makes us, fat's the enemy, right? Americans love an enemy, right? We love to point out an enemy and then just attack.
I eat avocado a day.
Yeah.
For the fats.
Right.
Healthy fats.
Good fats, right? But now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's but you're changing that trajectory, because that's what I was saying. Just like grandma and grandpa changed their trajectory when they said, no, butter's the enemy. Let's eat margarine, right? And then that's what they're raised up with, and the kids go to school and they get taught. I mean, I was still learning that in school, in college and in chiropractic school. Some of your basic nutrition stuff was still teaching that vegetable oil was better for us. I mean, it's been so squashed at this point. Like, the science is so definitive. Yet, I can walk into the grocery store. I can walk into the average American house, walk into their pantry, and find vegetable oil, gallons of it, right? So I tell people, just like that shift changed the course for generations, you course correcting it now changes your family's trajectory for generations to come, which is awesome.
And we have a few minutes left, and one thing I want to briefly touch up on is kind of on the same topic, but and I've recently gone through a whole shift with life and realized how much stress and anxiety and how that causes inflammation and chronic inflammation, and how that really affects your health as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I don't realize it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is absolutely stress plays a role. There's no doubt about it. But what's interesting is 2 people can go through the exact same stressful event. One of them has some health crisis that develops or spirals into serious anxiety or depression or something like this, right? And the other person right next to him was going through the exact same scenario alongside them. Let's say two adult siblings or something who lose a loved one. Perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference?
Probably their lifestyle.
It is, right? It's how healthy is the body and your ability to cope and adapt and deal with whatever stressors life is throwing at it. Because everything that comes at us is a stress, right? It's talking about being outside and it's hot and you're exercising or you're working, you're doing a physical job outside, right? Or you're playing sports. Well, the heat and the sun beating on you, it's 100 degrees in Texas and 90% humidity, right? It's like that is a stressor. How well you can cope with that determines how well you perform that day, how well you recover that night moving into the next day. Same thing is true with mental and emotional stress. If we're unwell physiologically inside, then we're not going to cope and deal very well. And so, again, it's so much more than just compartmentalizing, well, we have stress, and then we have whether or not we exercise, and we have whether or not we eat the right food, and whether or not we get enough sleep. It's all of it. You have to put it together.
Yep.
Because life is made up of stressors. It will never stop coming at you. I just wrote a newsletter about this at the office. I was like,
oh, really?
You can't stop the stressors from coming at you. So what you do is you prepare your body to deal with the stress. We can't prevent. So this idea of prevention, right? Yes, there's truth to that. There's some validity to the argument. But at the end of the day, we're not really going to prevent the things that cause us to have a problem.
But we never know what's going to come our way.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't help it that you get in a car accident. Some idiot rear-ended you at the stoplight, right? So how healthy are you? How healthy and strong is your spine and nerve system to deal with that trauma, right? You can't help it that a loved one dies too young necessarily, right? Tragic car accident, whatever, right? Can you cope and deal with that? Are you healthy enough physiologically? And that includes mentally and emotionally. I mean, we've had conversation about your quiet time, your spiritual life, etc. Like you cannot disconnect all this stuff. You're not a car.
Yeah.
You can take the alternator out and put a new one, and take the starter out, put a new one in.
I mean, sometimes I wish I could.
Right? It would be nice. It'd be okay, But at the end, but really, we don't really operate like that. Even though, and somebody might even listen to this and go, yeah, but you can do a heart transplant. Isn't it like putting in a new alternator in your car, a new starter? I'm like, well, yes, but then you take immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of your life because otherwise your body will reject the organ, right? So, while there's, some gray area there to a degree, it's like, but ultimately it's so much better to keep the one you got healthy.
Exactly.
And that's really what we're striving for our patients, people in our community.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. So, this was a great topic.
Yeah.
I think we definitely can have many more shows on many more topics.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to ask you guys is if there's some specific topics you want to talk about, put them in the comments. Let me know. Send me a message and we'll get back on and we'll kind of dig deep in that because there's a lot to dissect when it comes to that. And the main takeaway is when it comes to your health, it's more you can't control your outside surroundings. You can control your inner surroundings and how you react to that. So you either jump on track to trying to fix that now, or, you potentially may end up with consequences later on in life or your kids.
Yeah.
It's just, so absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
See you again soon.
Yeah, for sure.